Everyone knows we need more houses in the UK. The government's miserly targets for new homes come nowhere near what we need. Due to the recession, ever fewer are being built, and house prices and job losses mean many of us can't afford one. There are derelict properties, there are reusable spaces, but really we'd all like a detached home and garden. In fact, there's no shortage of space in Britain to build the homes we need and would like, but today's planning laws make that impossible. Yet in the past, people from London's East End did take matters into their own hands to build what they wanted. WORLDbytes volunteer Helder da Costa visited the plotlands in Essex with architect and author Ian Abley to find out more about a time when people were able to build more freely.
In the 1930s, this was a farm. It was ploughed land growing arable crops. The corn prices fell, the farmers couldn't make a profit, the land was sold off in plots, hence why it's called plotlands, to people from the East End as holiday homes, an escape from the dirt and the grime of 1930s London. And when the World War came along, Second World War, they were being bombed in London by the Germans, so this was a refuge for them, away from the bombing, because the docks were very close to the East End and it was very difficult to live there.
The people that moved here could buy a plot of land and build a larger home than they could ever possibly have afforded inside the city. Theirs to do with as they wanted. So it's a haven from the landlord and a sense of freedom. Technically, today, any young couple could organise themselves to build a home like this, better than this. Okay. Because obviously the technology that were available to this family has been improved upon. Yep. So I don't think it's a problem of technically building, and Britain is an industrial country with lots of skills and lots of building materials. Yep. The difference in 2009 with the 1920s is that people aren't free to build on farmland in the way they were then. After the Second World War, the ability to build homes like this was stopped by the creation of the planning system. Yeah. So people were no longer free to build on their own freehold land. Yeah. Unfortunately, for people of your generation, you couldn't just buy a plot of land, which is available cheaply, and build using your own resources. That you'd have to enter the market. And as you know, even in the middle of a recession, the housing market is unaffordable. Yeah. The thing that interests me about this house is that this is a small house, yep, on a budget, made by people who can just take a standard design and replicate them, build them on large numbers up and down the street, yep, and afford to do it. Okay. So it's the connection between somebody's income and the ability to get enough living space to bring up a family. I'm here with Dave Murch, who's a volunteer at Leindon Plotlands Museum, and thank you very much for showing us around the house. Could you tell me something about the young couple that built this home?
Yes, the couple were called Frederick and Nina Mills. Right. He was a self-employed carpenter and joiner, living in Romford at the time. Fairly unusual because most of the Plotlanders here were more East Enders. He purchased the land here in 1933. Right. Because he wanted a permanent residence rather than a weekend or holiday home. He purchased 3 plots of land, and it cost him a princely sum of £20 freehold. Right. He was so keen to move here that the first thing he built were the outside sheds, right, and he and his wife actually camped out in the sheds. Okay. He built just a bedroom and the living room, right, initially. Yeah. And a few years later, when the first of their children was expected, he's added the bedroom and kitchen on a little bit later. So the history of this dates back to just after the First World War? That's the... Yes, it was Lower Dunton Hall Farm, right, until 1920. It was owned by Trinity College, Cambridge, with, right, a tenant farmer. Okay. And by the following March, he sold it to a developer. Right. So by having the freehold, then people were just free to build what they wanted? Exactly, right, yeah. Yes. I mean, even the building regulations were not particularly tough in those days. Right. The developer advertised the land for sale, right, in East London newspapers. Okay, right. Right. Most East Enders were living in pretty poor, standard rented accommodation in, yeah, those days. Quite overcrowded.
What would £20 have been as an income?
We think it was probably 6 to 7 times a good weekly wage.
Okay.
Taking, say, the salary of a teacher or a police officer or something like that in those days, probably 6 to 7 times what they would earn for a week.
Right.
Having said that, I mean, you would now buy this piece of land for the equivalent in today's money.
Right. No, absolutely. And the value of this piece of land is now is planning approval, which exactly. is the peculiarity, isn't it? The idea that we need to build lots of new homes, I think, is obvious. Britain's got a population of 60 million people. There's 26 million households. The existing stock is falling apart as it's used, so it's a process of dilapidation. If 26 million homes were going to last 100 years, every year you'd have to build 260,000 new homes.
Okay.
Add the 260,000 to the government's figure of 240,000 new households. That's 500,000 homes that are needed in Britain every year just to keep the stock going. At the height of the boom, in 2007, Britain was building 200,000 homes. The last year, that was halved to 100,000. The figure may fall down towards 50,000. People can't afford to buy land in Britain. It's not because there's a shortage of land. Only about 10% of Britain is developed. And there's a lot of farmland that, as was the case here in Essex, isn't farmed profitably and could be bought at above agricultural value. So you could buy a hectare of land and put 20 of these houses on it today, and you could build those houses at £800 a square metre. So a tiny little home like this would cost something of the order of about £20,000 to build. A 100 square metre home would cost £80,000 to build. So it's not the cost of construction, it's the cost of buying a piece of land through the planning system.
A lot of people say that there's not enough land in the country, but the population seems to be growing. So what do you have to say about that?
6 million people in Britain, 26 million households, live in 10% of Britain, which it shocks a lot of people who live in a town.
Just 10%?
Yeah, you can get up in a hot air balloon or look out of an airplane or drive on a train and see how empty Britain is. So you could double the population of Britain and still not have a fifth of it built on. There's ample space in Britain. There's also about a third of Britain's farmland is paid to be idle. It isn't farmed. It's not profitable to be farmed. It's used as countryside. So it'd be perfectly possible to build as these people did in their youth, for the youth of today, without having to go anywhere near all of the beautiful places in Britain, the areas of outstanding natural beauty, the woodland, the parks. There's plenty of ordinary farmland that could be used as a place to live and turned into a new landscape. People can buy farmland without benefit of planning approval, and they can build homes. Individually, people have done that and had their homes demolished. If people were doing that in numbers, that got themselves together to build avenues and put in drains together, I'm personally much more interested in breaking the planning law than breaking into other people's property and occupying that as a squatter. I don't think that's particularly a healthy thing to do. The idea that people will go and develop their own homes in Britain's empty farmland, buy the land off the farmer at a very cheap price because farmers want to retire, and to start building their own homes at low cost. I think that's got a future. That's the task that we've got today, is how to build enough homes for everybody.